Welcome to another episode of the Great Work Launchpad. My name is Chris Nelson. My site is evolveconsciousness.org. Today is Wednesday, May 28th, 2025. And this is the Great Work Launchpad, episode 6, and a continuation of Shadow Work, part 4. And we're going to be talking about disunity consciousness. So, hold on a second, and let me get the VDO Ninja set up. Just a moment. Alright, OBS virtual camera. Alright. Invite a guest. Let's put that in there. Okay. So, there's the link for people who want to come on board. I know Brandon Spencer is going to come. And maybe we'll see Derek Bartolocelli and Theo, like the last time. And so I'm going to load up an image. Didn't have this prepared. Silly me. Where's my window? There you go. So let's see. Can I load this without maximizing it? So I do image. Browse. So before talking about, there we go. It worked. All right, we got Brandon here. Let's load him up. All right. Hey, Brandon. How's it going?
Howdy. Howdy. How's it going?
All right. Existing one, image. All right.
Oh, I remember this image.
It's an old school one there. I'll load it in this view instead. Bear with me, guys. Everything's manual here. Okay. So, to talk about disunity consciousness, first, all right, I gotta, we got someone else. I'm gonna reload the image after I bring Derek in here. Okay, image on the third scene. Here we go. Okay. So yes, before talking about the disunity consciousness, we'll talk about the affirmative of what is unity in order to know the disunity. I think it works better that way. And so before getting into this, so the disunity consciousness will be related to the apathy, ignorance, cowardice, and laziness. And that's, related to this one. I guess that could correlate to where you're not thinking. So if you're not thinking, well, you're not going to be learning, and then you're going to be ignorant. And if you have apathy, well, you're not going to be caring. That's the emotional side. And if you have cowardice and laziness, well, you're not going to have courage, and you're not going to have action. So that's just a brief correlation. And before we get into the disunity, so this is an infographic I made years ago, 2014, 2015, something like that. And we have the trinity of consciousness. We have thoughts on the bottom and emotion. So those are internal domains. That's why it's in blue. I color coded them. Internal is blue, external is red. And so our thoughts is our mind, and emotions are the heart. And they can feedback on each other, because emotions, you don't have emotions without having thoughts of some kind, without information coming in order to stimulate an emotional response. The mind needs to be there, and then you have the quote heart, whether it's the actual heart or not, it's symbolic. And that's our intelligence and care, or you could look at it intellect and care. And we can unify those two to create a third unity that leads towards our action, and that's why it's in red, because it's external, as opposed to blue, internal and unseen. The red is what is seen, so our actions are seen. And that requires courage and willpower to bring ourselves to act. And then our actions can feed back into our inputs of what we did, and then we can think about it and then feel about it and then modify our actions or engage in them again and keep repeating it. So on the right, we have thoughts, emotions, and actions are not conflicting. That's when we have unity consciousness. As we think, so we feel, so we do, as Mark Passio coined. Our actions do not betray our words, thoughts, or feelings. So we got the blue to signify unity. We got thought, emotion, and action all lining up. We got unity consciousness. But if one contradicts the other, then it's not unity, but disunity, disharmony, opposition, conflict, non-integrated. So you could have your thought and emotion, but not your action being lined up. You could have your thoughts, but your emotion and action being against your thoughts. Or you could have your thoughts not one way, and then your emotions are one way, and then your actions are matching your thoughts, but your emotions. So I guess the check mark here, I didn't explain it, but it'd be aligned to morality. So where you have, and then you could also have unity consciousness of your thoughts, emotions, and actions. I guess it's more complex than the simplified infographic I have here. You could have thoughts, emotions, and actions which are in unity consciousness, but disaligned with natural law, with moral law, with objective morality, which would mean you're still in unity consciousness, but I guess it would be a bunch of X's united, or red check marks or something. I don't know. I'd have to think about how to represent that. So that's the basis of unity consciousness. And if anyone wants to talk about the unity consciousness or get into the disunity, go ahead. I'll let you guys have the board.
It's been it's crazy, man. It's been over 10 years since you created that slide. Wow.
Yeah, been a while.
Man, yeah, man, we were so much freer, 10 years ago compared to now.
That pre-COVID era.
Yeah, I know. Like it's crazy because I'm always like, man, we'll never get back to those times, or man, it's like it's insane. But yeah, the disunity um is something that we not only see within the world, but we see within individuals who claim they want freedom. We still see it in like even in the natural law community. Because if someone is disunited within themselves, then they will spread that outwardly and sow those seeds of chaos, in whatever group or relationships that they are in. So, like I've said in much of my work, and this slide has, been highly, inspirational and influential in my work. We see that he'll always talk about the two out of the three, and how that equates to, the 666, her repeating. And, of course, Mark has talked about this, along with as many others who have, studied his work and piggybacked off his work. But we see this still in a lot of people, and that disunity, or that improper, unity, is what we see him manifesting outwardly. And that unification, or that inward unification, and doesn't really matter if you want to call it the alchemical wedding, or the merging of the left and right hemispheres of the brain. Like it's been symbolically represented in so many different ways. That is what we are trying to convey when we are talking about doing this inner work, because if one is not aligned, then you yourself aren't integrated, you know. And what does it mean to be integrated or to have integrity? That means to be whole, to have that wholeness, to be filled with something. So if you are, not unified internally, then you are still somewhat broken. You are still somewhat split. You are still somewhat in a form of hell contradiction. So we should strive to always want to, get better and learn to harmonize. And when we see this disunification, being spread, it's an easy sign, that this person or this individual, unfortunately, is not unified within themselves. Because this is something that I personally keep seeing, you know, from individuals who were, in this movement, which is not really a movement. But you see a lot of talk, but hell, by their fruits you shall know them. Their actions are what speak the loudest. And, people want to nitpick other people's works. People want to nitpick other people's flaws. And that's not what it is about. This is not an egoic, battle. It's supposed to be about adhering to principles, serving truth, and ending slavery. That's when you can tell that someone is truly unified because they are striving to reach those goals. And if you are not striving to reach those goals, serve truth, adhere to principles, and end slavery, then you yourself are still not at a state of internal unification. So, but yeah, Chris, this has been. I mean, you have so many like wonderful slides. It would literally be hard to pick a top three or a top five. But yeah, I remember when I came across this slide, because I heard Mark talk about it, but to actually, see it, because some people are I would say majority of human beings are like visual learners. So just being able to see the actual diagram that you created, and then you added you also have one kind of mixed in with the trivium, and you kind of blended and merged it all together. It was always hell amazing because it took my level of understanding to like higher points. And if it wasn't for your work and some of these creative slides, it helped me reach a certain means of unification within myself that took years. But yeah, the thoughts are the most important, because I find it that's where a lot of people struggle, trying to silence that mind chatter. The mind is always running wild because, sadly, people are just, you know, hell addicted to, fixation by the dopamine on, social media, or they're in this, busy, hell mindset to where they can't sit down and kind of quiet and, silence, the mind, and learn to focus, and harmonize, with their thoughts. So that right there is the baseline. And hell, like you said, those thoughts are going to create hell emotions. And then those emotions are going to lead to action and behaviors. So it has to be a stage, a buildup. You have the one, then it harmonizes with the two, creating and birthing, right action. Well, supposed to be, her right action. Um, to pull one out of the other is a flaw, and it is inaccurate, and it is incorrect. And we still see that, sadly. But yeah, hell, I'll pass it on to Derek.
Yeah, cheers, Brandon. And it kind of reminds me of job we had on dissolving the divide in regards to the inner divides of how things are in balance, right? With yeah, obviously going off this chart, whether it be thoughts are not properly aligned with their emotions could be running rampantly away from proper rational thoughts. Where's the balance, right? As you're saying, like take the time, breathe, meditate on these things, recenter, recalibrate, and yeah. So there's so much to be. I mean, we could spend the whole hours on the whole inner divide and stuff. Not to go on another episode of that, but yeah, in regards to that great work and what people really need to excavate from themselves, getting the lead out. Beat that lead. Good old lead beater, right? I like that pseudonym. But it really helps one eradicate the competition one has within themselves in regards to wrestling with all these thoughts that aren't necessarily theirs, and they're able to gain control and propagate more of their own conscious thoughts that are going to stabilize their emotions better, which is going to have a more consistent, composed behavior and with those actions that follow suit, right? So yeah, I'm going to keep that short and sweet, actually. Chris, I'm going to pass it off to you because I'm still writing down a couple of notes that I have in regards to your title of this chat. Yeah. Let's have a bon balade. Are we walking on a path? Sorry, go for it. Is your mic muted, Chris? Can't hear you.
Sorry, yeah. I forgot
Yeah.
to mute myself. Thanks for letting me know.
No worries.
Yeah. So this was part of the first presentation I ever did called Foundational Living and True Unity. The infographics, like, obviously they're not top quality there, even compared to my later ones, which are nicer. So yeah, so what I'm going to be talking about related to what Brandon was saying was that, even in what you guys have done with the One Great Work Warriors, there was the episode on compromise. And we are engaging in compromise because, as even Passio has mentioned in several places, he's talked about, we're in a war and we're in the trenches with people that we don't necessarily like, and we're united for like a I don't know, a temporary unity. It's not a true unity, but they're at where they're at. So this is what, like, this unite on the path we walk. So you can choose, it's representing different levels of moral alignment in going up that mountain of morality and how aligned you are with that peak of morality. So some people can be higher up, some people can be lower up, and that's the different paths, a different pace. We're walking at a different pace. We're walking at a different rhythm. So these are different levels of being and living. Now, you can, if you're at a higher level, choose to, walk with other people at a lower level. And that's where you engage in compromise, because when you're more morally aligned, you want to maintain that integrity you have within yourself, but a lot of people are not at that same level. So this is where the compromise comes in, and that's why, we have to remember that not everyone's going to be, everyone's on their journey, yada, 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 that stuff there. But so we need to, by doing our work, we're influencing other people who probably don't know the information and aren't living it as aligned as we are. So already there, we're influencing people that we don't know, who are going to try to elevate their consciousness, from bronze or lead into silver and gold, that alchemical process. So that's going to be happening with people you don't even interact with. And then even with people you interact with, whether in real life or online, you can have that dynamic in play. So even though you're more morally aligned in your non-enslavement of all beings, you can unite with and collaborate and do things with other people who aren't there yet, who recognize the truth of it and are working to get there, or even with people who reject it and say, no, animals don't matter or whatever, but they care about human freedom or something, so you can collaborate on that level, that lower level. And so there's always this compromise that's coming into play when you're in the trenches and you're going to be fighting with people you don't like against a larger foe. So you'll be united in some respects, but not in a proper unity, like on that path that you're walking. So here we have 4 groups in my infographic. So you might be, higher at the top, and it'd be great if you could unite with people who are at the same level of unity as you, and strive for that, try to get people up to that level. But the reality is that's not where the interactions are going to happen overall, because that takes a lot of work. That takes a lot of work on yourself. Hence, this series on initially add a longer title, Barriers to Initiation, Facing the Mirror, and then I just shortened it to Shadow Work because it was a lot shorter and it takes up a lot of fucking space. So just shorten it to Shadow Work. And so this is what we're emphasizing is, at your level, it could be people not at your level and they have work to do. And, so when you're doing the influence, are they doing the work? No. Well, then you could, like Passio does, that's what he does is, if you're going to tune into his work, well, that's going to be the forced shadow work where he's talking about your failings and that you're not doing enough and you need to get involved and you need to face yourself and what are these limiting self-beliefs that you engage in that prevent you from engaging in the work. And we'll get into those later. I have that on my list to eventually get to in like a few weeks or months or however long it takes us to get there. But, this is all part of the shadow work. So, and telling people like you're not doing enough, get off your fucking ass, do something. Okay, you need to learn more, then learn more, put in the time, sacrifice the time. We've already talked about that a bit. We'll talk about it more. And this is where we can get harsh. And then he referred to it as a petty tyranny in terms of getting involved in the great work in whatever capacity. Just start doing something. So in that respect, people can be engaging in the great work at whatever level, a minor level, a more involved level. And, they can always up their game and get more involved and put more time in and develop more skills and take like how to be the true media and develop skills and create more content and learn how to use tools like Photoshop and Illustrator and and whatever, and create stunning visuals and movie animations or something. Anyways, so there's a progression, and that's a progression technological wise in the great work, and there's progression in moral alignment. So when we're trying to fight this war, well, you can stick with the moral unity of where you're at and try to get people up there. And in that respect, people have to face themselves and do the work, but they need the information. And sure, you can tell them like, okay, well, you're failing in this respect. And, you could do it in a harsh way, or you could just state it matter of fact, and you don't need to yell, or you can yell like Passio's done. Everyone has their own style and how angry they get and the righteous anger. But so it depends how you wanted to engage in it and what level you're going to try to get people to unite on things. And when we're talking about, the animal issue, well, you can talk about that like I have in my earlier work, and now I don't really talk about it because I'm more focusing on trying to get people to even, get on the human level, because this is what I talk about. And I think I had an infographic in my morality presentation where the circles of identification and compassion. If you're not even at the point, so, great on the vegans who get there, but are still statists. There's like a conflict there, but they've managed to put their compassion um, and circle of identification larger than even their own species, and that's great that they managed to do that. That's a monumental effort to have gone beyond it. But a lot of people are still stuck in ego that they can't even face that, and so they got to start with what's closer to them, what they most identify with, which obviously is yourself, your own identity, and then you identify with yourself and your family and your friends and your community and your own species. And so that's where I think a lot of the work needs to happen, because realistically we're not going to you know free the animals that we're exploiting while we're still exploiting ourselves and enslaving ourselves. So that doesn't mean you can't work on it. That doesn't mean you can't talk about it. But I think the majority of the focus should be on getting people to do the shadow work, develop the self-love, to care that they are themselves enslaved, and care to activate themselves to do something about their own enslavement, which is engaging in the great work. And yeah, I'll leave it there for now. And if you guys want to add anything on that.
Hell, yeah, hell, great point. And I highly, hell agree. There's a lot of issues that one can talk about, and yeah, what man does to animals is a huge issue, and it's a big problem. But sadly, it's a problem that most people just, like, even when I've tried to, hell, talk to people, hell, about these issues, they really don't care. So I have to find a way, to kind of meet them at a common ground in order for information, to somewhat flow through. So when I relate it to a human, a human to human health experience, a one to one health experience, or I relate it to a loved one, who they may care for, then there is somewhat of a more connection, because it's more relatable to them. That's not to say that they're going to take in everything that I say, because most people don't. Because once that conversation hell is over, then they're back to their subconscious programming, and they've forgot about it, because that short-term memory never really gets properly installed and turned into I'm sorry, a long-term memory. So it's just pretty much like in through one ear and out the other. But yeah, trying to find some form of common ground when you are having these conversations is key. And that's why I say, like, you need to have like multiple tools in your toolbox, because one approach may work on certain people, and then so it may not work on others. And yeah, hell, I'm a big fan of vitriol, because it's supposed to be there to help break down, that hard substance, that hard hell calcification, that ego that most people are, sadly constructed in. You know, they've thrown their hook down, and they planted their hook into the ground, and the ego said, I'm not moving. Um, oh yeah, and there's always work to do. There is always work to do. You can always, help, not just, work upon yourself, but what we are doing is a craft. So I spend a lot of time trying to get better at this craft, when it comes to doing this work. Yeah, I have more time than most people, way more time than most people, but so I can split my time, doing that internal work, which should never be negated, and then learning how to harness and mold and fine tune and sharpen my craft, so I can get better and learn more and have more tools when it comes to trying to communicate this stuff and educate people. So yeah, there is always work how that can be done. And like, what I mean by getting better at like this craft is, there's a lot of tools out there that we can use. And my gosh, if we don't learn these tools, then eventually we are going to lose these tools. So we really need to take hell advantage of the stuff. And there are many classes to where how you can take for free, to where like you can learn how to do stuff like we're doing. How you can learn how to create slides like Chris. You can learn how to do a 2-hour live stream, like Derek does. It's really easier to do now than it was kind of like before, how COVID or pre-COVID. um but there's so many tools out there, and there is a level of sacrifice, there is a level of time, there is a level of focus, there is a level of care that needs to be, dedicated to learn how to, use these tools so you can get better, at this craft. And that's something that should not be, ignored, because you should always be trying to sharpen not just, your inner mind and your inner realm, but this craft as well, and get better at doing it. How doesn't mean you just focus on aesthetics, but you know this is a learning, a means to learn and a means to create. So
Get those conscious creations. Yeah. So what would be some of the stumbling blocks that would prohibit someone from doing those things, right? We're talking about disunity consciousness. And I really appreciate what you said. I'm not trying to we got to talk about this now, but it all ties in, and there's that competition within oneself, right? And you can see that being played out with their interactions with others, as well as just like constant comparing and all these things, and like the criticizing without the constructive aspects of it. I'm always down to refine and fine tune my craft, as well as a lot of folks that I'm in network with. And speaking of network, right? What is that about? Right? Because you have to actually, have proper interactions with people. You know, you're corresponding with others, and how are you able to, stay on the same page, right? Uh, it's a lot easier said than done, yet for whatever reason, it's not always the case. Because, yeah, like you said, yeah, a lot of people are just on these different levels, and that's fine. And I feel like one of the things that, can be, one of these, I don't like the words, I'm not thinking about stumbling blocks, but kind of like a wall or something that's stagnating growth or movement towards actual collaboration is I guess meeting people at their level or just being open-minded, right? What's up with the critical we're all critical thinkers, right? How critical is your mind thinking about these things, and how open is it to other people's perspectives and stuff? And like, hey, are you able to work with what you got and what others have? Like, think about any kind of job you have in real life. All right, like, we're all in the same boat in this like workspace. Like, how are we gonna just make it happen regardless of where everyone's skill sets are at? Because it's obvious that uh, Neil over here, he's slacking on this stuff, so everyone's got to pull weight for a little bit more. Yet, he's still on the team. We need him to continue doing his stuff and encourage him and all this stuff. So, how can we, you know, make the correction without, breaking his balls or what? You know what I mean? Like, even though it's like, I wish folks would have a little tougher skin sometimes, right? And folks take the things too, personally, especially when you're talking about something that doesn't really have to do with them, but folks get those ego attachments, and so there you go. I'm kind of going off on a tangent, I think, but so in contrast to the competition, comparing, and criticizing, in the negative aspect of criticizing. There are positive aspects of the constructive criticizing, but where's the compassion, collaboration, and communion to really forge that union of or unity with folks? It's kind of like, I know it might sound cheesy, but an ex girlfriend of mine said, in some kind of spiritual conversation context, it's like, are we not all trying to like walk each other home to whatever degree? In a sense, I'm thinking about that. It just popped into my head. Looking at this graph. So yeah, so it kind of falls back on like the each one teach one and stuff. We can learn something from everyone, even if we're not going to like everyone. We're not going to agree with everyone's whatever degrees of whatever they have to say in their perspectives, right? So how can we coexist? Yeah, it's really think about composing your energetic transmissions, not just through your vocal cords, but your body language, your eye contact, and so many different aspects of these interactions that seem to be not the same, in the digital realm as in real life. But anyways, guys, I'm toast, man. I worked too much and all that stuff. My eyelids are getting too heavy for me.
All right.
But yeah.
It's all good, but that's a
Yeah,
sacrifice, you're willing to do.
yeah, for sure. There's a lot of sacrifice with the great work in so many aspects of one's life, and yeah, we're all compromised in life to a degree. Yeah, check out that episode we did on the One Great Work Warriors. Chris, thanks for bringing that up. Thanks for bringing this whole subject in continuation with the series. I love it. I love being a part of it, and yeah, I love trying to do what's right and necessary to usher in the proper heart-based humanity. More freedom for all. Sovereign society type of stuff. So, cheers. Take care, y'all. Thanks.
All right. Well, we didn't get to say goodbye, but bye bye, Derek. You left pretty quick there. So, you wanted to say something?
Oh no, but hell, I know it's late where he's at because we did a recording last night, so he's probably hadn't got much sleep since then. If he had to work, so
Cool. And I found another infographic here. When I saw the path one, I saw, I did do a Trinity of Unconsciousness.
yeah,
So yeah, this is what we're talking about, the disunity consciousness. What I had in mind is the whole aspect of that negative pathway of the natural law expressions chart. Fear. Well, it's a modification of it. It's not exactly like Passio did it, but
yeah,
you
yeah,
have apathy and ignorance, and you have cowardice and laziness. So when you have ignorance, is I don't know, because you're not seeking the truth in some cases, or you might not know that it's even there to go look at, or you might willfully choose to not look at it for whatever reason. There's plenty of stuff that I don't look at. I choose not to. Like, I don't give a shit about, NFL or NHL or whatever, all the sports and other things that a lot of people care about. But I'll just bring that back in. Yeah, and then we have apathy. So I don't care. So you don't care for truth. And like I was mentioning, sports or whatever. Well, those are trivial truths, not knowing sports stats or whatever. We're not talking about all truths. We're talking about quality truths. Mentioned that before in this Great Work Launchpad series. We're talking about the quality truths. And the highest quality truth is the definitive objective knowledge of the difference between right and wrong, otherwise known as objective morality. So that's where you don't care about objective morality, you don't know about objective morality, and you don't feel like acting in objective morality. So you don't act in objective morality because of cowardice, you have fears of doing things. We talk about doing the great work, putting out content, putting your voice out, adding your voice to the voice of truth to make it bigger. Well, there's fears involved in that. And then there's laziness, just downright laziness. Even if you're not afraid, then you just don't feel like it and you don't want to and you don't want to sacrifice. So these are different levels of the trinity of unconsciousness, or the disunity consciousness, where we're not properly taking what we know. So if you do know moral truth, but then you're not caring enough about it to then overcome your cowardice and laziness in order to activate yourself. Man, I got these, like, I don't know, 0.5 millimeter size black flies getting in through the screen. And anyways, that's just a side note. Been doing gardening today, and it's just annoying, all the bugs that come out. But
Water and sugar will take care of them.
water and sugar? You mean attract
Yeah.
them more?
Yep. And they'll drown in it.
Oh, you just put it out. I thought I was
Yeah.
thinking,
Yeah,
rub
just put
that
it in a
on your
cup.
skin. Put some water and sugar on your
Yeah,
skin. I
no.
was like,
Yeah, no.
what?
No, yeah.
That's
Yeah,
gonna
just put it
attract
in a
them to
cup.
me.
Yeah, just take some water and put some sugar in it or something sweet, and they'll drown in it. Hell, it's the thing, how we learn freaking the South. Yeah.
With black flies, you
It's,
got black flies down there?
well, we have like these little small gnats that are just annoying.
Okay.
And we do have flies, but it's more of like the small gnats that just find a way to get in like any small like cut through a screen or like any window or door sill, because they can be hell annoying. But yeah, we
Alright,
got
so
flies, but
yeah, we got super small, like adult black flies, and then these like baby ones, which you can barely see. They're like the tip of a pin size. And we got horse flies and deer flies, which are huge flies that like rip out chunks of your skin.
yeah, we don't have those, thankfully. But
Yeah,
hell, I've heard
we
about
got
them.
that up here in the north, boy. We got
Holy
some
crap!
nasty big flies. They're huge. They're like twice the size of a
Yeah,
normal fly, or 3 times. And yeah, then they like rip out chunks. They hurt. They fucking hurt when they get you.
hell, I can't stand flies. And I remember it was like I was reading a book on symbology, and they were saying like one culture how they respected the fly because it represented a means of persistence. Because the fly
Oh,
will keep coming. Yeah, and
it's
it's
a good
it's just
symbol
so.
there for
I know.
persistence. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Get on that rotten food. Get on that pile of shit. Swarm around that shit. All right, enough bug talk. I guess we'll get
yeah,
back to
bug talk.
yeah. So I guess that's what I would have talked about. And then at the bottom here we have. Do you know about the problem? Well, a lot of people in our society as well. I don't know, and I don't care. That combines ignorance and apathy. That famous. Do you know what apathy and ignorance are? And people say, "Oh, I don't know what it is, and I don't care." So I don't know
True,
if you
true.
want to talk any more about that.
Yeah, because you also talked about the dark trivium. Would you correlate these two, together, and how this is, how I would say majority of us get through that first state of ignorance is because, you know, that dark trivium, as far as like dark grammar or perverted grammar, is being bombarded, like we are bombarded, with that. And we don't know how to correctly go through or, gather information to get to that next step of logic, which, you know, um, would lead toward, not being logic or, um, the false notion of logic. So would you kind of put these two, together, the dark trinity of, or the trinity of unconsciousness, and the dark trivium, is, I want to say you called it in your earlier work. I think you're muted. Christian, muted.
God damn it. Sorry. I don't know how long I've been muting for. Yeah, so that's what I got here is a later version, building off the trinity of unconsciousness. Then I tied it into the trivium. So, yeah. So this one's for the masses, and I'll try to find the one that I had for the rulers or whatever. They have their own version of the trivium for the masses to be fooled. That one's actually nicer. Yeah, so the negative circle of life as opposed to the positive circle of life. This is talking about. Here, I'll just go get the other one. That's the original one, I think. Oh shit! Why is that so fucking small? Oh, I grabbed the wrong one. Where is it?
So this is what I was kind of talking about in my Funnel 4 presentation, with the whole, perversion. Yeah. And like how we are taking that and just running with it. And like why we should be extremely careful and particulate on the information that we take in, pay attention to, and also the information we put in front of our kids, because it's highly crucial, because that right there is going to lead toward more problems if not done correctly.
Yeah.
Yeah. This slide. Okay. All right. Yeah. You called it limited grammar.
And this was the other one. Oh, they're both for the masses. Anyways, so we got limited grammar input. So control input of reality. What is available for you to be aware of? So all this relates to input of information, the knowledge, understanding, wisdom, where you're going to input, and then you think about it, how you feel about it, how you act on it. And the information is crucial. So for the masses to be fooled, well, they're limiting the grammar input. That's how the controllers control the flow of information. That's why censorship is such a problem. Because instead of you having access to the information and being able to apply the trivium in a free manner, well, they're limiting your grammar input. So they control the input of reality, what is available for you to be aware of, and then you're limiting that logical processing, restricting analysis capability from how to think to what to think. So they're not in providing you with the tools of how to think to do the trivium yourself. They're bypassing your own application of the trivium method and telling you what to think. And that's what most of the formal education is. And then the result is the limited rhetorical output. So you have limit words of usage, limited word usage, change the meaning of words, reduce the meaning, invent new words. And this is Newspeak in George Orwell's 1984. Newspeak is, there's like that one part where he's talking to George or something, and George is like so proud of the new edition of Newspeak because they like eliminated a bunch of words. So now instead of saying like very good or something, it was like double plus good, and so they just like keep restricting the use of language and making it more limited, so you can't define and relate to aspects of reality. Because that's what one thing Philip K. Dick said. I have that quote in several places in my work, that you limit the use of words, and you limit the ability to perceive reality, something along those lines. It's a really good quote. So in the end is what we have is we restrict imagination and consciousness. So all this control of the information and you're not able to have information on possibilities. So you're not able to even think of those possibilities or imagine new ones. You can't imagine those possibilities, and you're not going to act on it. So it's restricting your consciousness. And language is used to control and limit consciousness, the control of reality through the ability to perceive and discern accurately. And the other one, well, that was the negative circle of life, which has it more in a visual way related to the first one I brought up here with thought, emotion, and action. And whoops, where was I? Here. That restricting thought. You have emotional mind control. So this one's different than the other infographic. So it's still restricting thought by restricting access, restricting that grammar. So that limited grammar, the other one was talking about limited logic and limited rhetoric. Well, these aren't the same as thought. And that's why I have my infographic of like the seal of Solomon, the two triangles. And so this one doesn't have the inverted triangle for the trivium aspects, but it has the Trinity of Consciousness triangle. So we're restricting thought when you limit the grammar. You limit the input of information. You control the flow of information, which is what we have a lot of, all that censorship. And so we get ignorance, less knowledge, and then also false knowledge. Instead of true knowledge, things that are true, we have false knowledge of things that are false, accepted as true. And so then even when you do apply logic, you're applying things in an erroneous way because you're going to be contrasting and comparing things and trying to filter it with things that you accept as false. And then you're going to be rejecting other information. So you're going to be increasing that limitation. You're going to get the grammar, I guess, as initial input, but then you're going to reject it because it doesn't conform to your false knowledge, the falsity that you're attached to. You're not actually reevaluating it. You have some false foundations in your epistemological and axiomatic framework. And so with that limited logic, and then we get that restricting of thought and bouncing off the emotions, well, you also have the emotional mind control, as Passio talks about it, where, the famous part that he talked about was related to police and the order followers, where someone has, someone they know is an order follower. And it could be like a child who has a parent and they're like, no, my daddy's a good guy. And like, yeah, maybe towards you and how you identify with them and how you feel about them and that you're a parent. But you're not looking at the global of who they are and how they're failing to live up to morality and how they treat other people. They're doing immoral things to other people. And they're engaging in emotional mind control because their feelings and how they feel towards someone and their identification and attachment towards someone else is clouding their honest evaluation of that person overall and what they do and their behavior overall, what their actions do and how they're initiating harm to others. So you end up with less care about moral truth or less care about what that person is doing because of that emotional mind control. And then so we already talked about the limited rhetoric and restrict possible action and behavior. So then you're not going to, tell your father, hey, what you're doing, I don't, I like you and I like how you treat me, but, your job is wrong. So people will not tell their parents even if they know about it because they don't want to jeopardize those relationships. And so that's the cowardice and the laziness, the less courage and will part. What do you got to say?
Yeah, I was gonna say about the that does lead to cowardice, and reminded me of a story that I had to endure when I found out an employer was stealing money from me. And I don't know how long, this was going on. And this was like right around like early, COVID. And I don't make that much money, being a umpire. Like hell, I make enough just to pay the bills, keep food freaking the table. Every now and then I'm able to buy something, hell that I need. But I found out this individual was stealing from me. And I was literally faced with a dilemma. And, I had, you know, gained some knowledge. I had verified it. And of course, that led to an emotional, her response. But then, when it came to that third, I it was two things. I could either have been a coward and chose not to have done something because I knew it was going to hit me financially. And not only was it going to hit me, it was going to affect a lot of, like other umpires. But, I had to stand on principle and I still, blew the lid on what this individual was doing. So when he was talking about that, like the whole thing of cowardice, hell sprung up because, hell, I was faced with the opportunity to do the right thing. And if someone's stealing money from you and then stealing money from, multiple people, regardless of whatever emotional, hell attachment or, like financial, hell attachment, you still have to do the right thing. And it wasn't easy, because like no one wants to be, hit financially, and especially during COVID, when most of us was already, hit hard, financially. But hell, just looking at the slide, hell, that's what have popped up. But yeah, the whole limited grammar, um, that's something that right there, with the censorship, and that's what we see is when you start to limit grammar, then you can start to control, how not just the way people think and shape, how the way they think, but you, in a sense, can start to, control, her reality, the fake, how molded, how matrix version, because then right there, how you can lead people to pretty much do whatever. And then those people who take that limited, grammar or, that perverted, knowledge, once the truth is put in front of them, majority of them, because they've built those, false axioms and, like dogmatic, how worldviews based on that limited grammar, they will deny or, turn down true, correct, information, and that's like the other part, is, when you try to give, individuals this information, they turn it down, because like you said, it doesn't fit to their molded paradigm. It doesn't fit to, this negative trivium that has been installed. And then that also leads to false solutions that are being, held thrown around. People think that, we're going to get to freedom, by doing all of these other things, but no mention of, morality, no mention of shadow work, like no mention of moral education of, the youth, no mention of, trying to raise consciousness. Of course not. Like why would we ever mention that? But it leads to more falsity and more things that don't lead to what the individual says they want. And it leads us further and further away from freedom and, keeping that pendulum, you know, on the modality of slavery. But yeah, this right here has, you know, hell, I've been talking about this more, because people just look at the trivium as a means of truth discovery. But like I, heard James Corden say in one of his talks, like the trivium has also been used as a means to pollute, by way of, like what we are talking about and what, Chris has put into the slide. So that's why we need to have that correct, information so we can do the due diligence ourselves so we can, learn these things. Then therefore we can start to weed these things out of us. And of course, start to try to educate, others. But without the correct information, that's not possible, because when you truly understand this, you can see how this is so evil, so insidious, because they are actually poisoning the well in which individuals go to drink. And I'm not talking about like a physical drinking, I'm talking about like a symbolic drinking. They're poisoning the stream of information by way of the limited grammar, by way of the perverted grammar, and therefore you go and you drink from this, this poisonous well, by taking in this limited grammar, then that right there, poisons how the mind, it poisons the thoughts, poisons the health emotions, and then it leads to, how improper, behavior, or how cowardice. So it's really insidious. It is straight evil. I know. Hey, I'm the one person who's like highly familiar with your work. So yeah, shit, yeah, yeah.
Oh, why is this muted again? Man, my mic got muted this whole time. I don't know what's
Oh
up with
no,
OBS.
I was hearing you.
Yeah, I know,
Yeah,
but
you.
I mute it here. It's this. When I switch to your view, so I think all the other times that I was talking about when I switched to this view. Shit. Well, anyways. So what I was talking. This fucking bullshit OBS. So yeah, I have like 3 scenes for a single guest, and I have 3 scenes for adding images, and one of them was muted. So this is the one that was muted with you. So yeah, anyways, what I was saying is people don't want to hear things. You're going to be arguing with a wall, and you can put pressure on people. You could be repeating things. Do you want to argue with a wall, whether it's a troll online, you want to argue and convince them? There are people in your personal life, people somewhere else on the different paths that we walk. People morally not united with you, and they're at a lower, they're more morally relativistic. Well, do you want to argue with them? Okay, But if they don't want to hear it and they're stuck in whatever they're attached to, then you're essentially arguing with a wall. You're not going to be advancing anything. Because what are we trying to do? Which is what I was mentioning before. Well, what's the great work about? The great work is about creating content in a formalized way so that it's logically structured and you're presenting ideas that people can consume and make sense of things. That's what the great work is supposed to be. Now, if that is your goal, then are you achieving that goal when you focus on one person or two or three or a group or whatever, and you're going to criticize them or whatever and you're going to try to convince them of something? You think it's going to work? Well, I think you're arguing with a wall. So, moral relativists in anywhere, you could put the information out, but if they don't want to hear it, then you're taking that time you have where you could be creating new content or explaining more things in more detail, and then that time is better spent doing that, because that informative content, which can elevate consciousness for those willing to consume it, will have been created, versus taking your time to target people who aren't on the moral path that you walk. They don't get it. They don't want to get it. They reject it. So you're going to be investing your time and focusing on an individual or a group or whatever. And your time could be better spent doing other things, which advances the cause of creating freedom, true freedom. And that means putting out content which has value to elevate consciousness because it's bringing some quality truths and amplifying the voice of truth for that effort, for people to potentially come across it and then learn from it and then change themselves and engage in that shadow work. But if you're just focusing on certain individuals or a group of people and they already don't want to hear it, they're not going to listen to you. So you're essentially just wasting your time. So what's the point? Okay, you want to keep doing that, but you're arguing with a wall. So what is the point? You're not even valuing your own time in the way I see it. So, probably you should reevaluate how you value your own time and put it into something that's going to be more beneficial to that overall effort of the goal of the great work, which is achieving true freedom. Because putting your time and attention and persistence and energy and all that into just focusing on moral relativists who don't want to get it, don't want to hear it, are too attached to their ego, to themselves or whatever, and you're arguing with the wall. So what's the point? You gotta move on. That's what I learned long ago. I guess 15 years ago. You can you can have a conversation, and once you see, because people can talk, and then you can see their consciousness. You can see what state it's in. And then you can see, well, is it worth it for me to invest more time in this, seeing as how rigid they are? And like I said, if it's someone you care about, then you can do like Passio did and with his mom, and then after 20 years, she's finally going to start to get it or whatever. But, it's how much do you value your time, or how much do you value the other person that you want to invest it in them? But online people, there's tons of people that are moral relativists, and regarding our community and natural law movement, I'm not part of any movement. I'm collaborating with people who have a goal to end either all enslavement or mostly enslavement, and I'll collaborate with different people at different levels and maybe help them out on something that they're doing or do something together with them. But I'm not part of a group identity, like a movement or a community or anything. I'm my own person. Everyone's their own person. And I'm not getting attached to a community or a movement of natural law or a freedom community or movement or whatever. We're just all individuals we say we have certain goals, and some can be more aligned with those goals and some can be less aligned. But like I was saying earlier on, there's this aspect of compromise and being in the trenches and in the war well, the war all of us are against, we call it the New World Order. Well, it's about our enslavement, imposing greater enslavement. So you can align with different people in temporary blocks of your life. So for 1 hour each day for 2 weeks, or a 2 week period, or a month, and then that's it, and you never talk to them, and you don't associate with them, you don't collaborate afterwards with that, or you do an interview with someone that's like, you view them as morally relativistic, but you do an interview, you share your information, and maybe it has an impact on them and influence them. But if you're just going to be going on the interview and then you're going to be like, you're a fucking piece of shit, and what the fuck's wrong with you, and all this shit or whatever, and you want to be vitriolic and insult them, well, you think that's going to have a positive influence upon them to try to elevate their consciousness? Well, I don't think so. And, that's why Pasio, when he goes on other people's interviews, he's calm and collected and respectful. And then when he's on his own show, he's like he's talking about people in general who aren't engaged and haven't gotten into the war. They're not in the trench. They're not in the battle. And he recognizes that there's other people at certain levels of consciousness, certain levels of moral alignment that aren't at his moral alignment, but he'll take the work where he can get it, take the help where he can get it. He'll, say, thank you for joining in the effort, for joining in the war and the spiritual war and the info war, and doing some part in your part to advance the cause. Even though we're, on my infographic, we're not on the same path, we're not on the same moral unity, but there's a commonality of a goal, even though it's not exactly the same goal. In the people at a higher moral level, they have a bigger circle, and then the people at the lower moral level, well, the intersection of your goals could be smaller, but there's still a shared intersection, as opposed to people who are uniting with you at a higher moral level. They'll have a higher intersection of that unity and that goal that you're trying to achieve. So even at this lower level, the more morally disunited people, who are more morally relativistic, you still have a shared goal in some aspect of, attaining, increasing freedom and decreasing enslavement. So that's where there's this aspect of compromise, and you could be a purist and stay at your level and only accept people at your level. And okay, that's fine. You're not going to have as much of an impact though, because you're not going to be influencing the people at those lower levels. And if you're antagonistic or have animosity or, verbally abusive or whatever and towards them, well, you're not going to have much of an influential impact. And, like Pasio can do it, and it's not for the babies who want to be spoon-fed, He's looking for the adults and making them into teachers. And if that's the path you want to take, well, don't be surprised if people don't want to talk to you, like Pasio. A lot of people don't want anything to do with his work. And when you do your own work, well, you can do it the same way, and you could be even more rigid in who you want to associate with in terms of moral unity versus moral relativism. And well, that'll be your choice, and that's what you're going to get, is based on what you choose to do. And then you'll have more people dislike you, but you got your moral integrity and you're sticking to it, and that's fine. But you're not going to work with other people and collaborate towards that smaller goal that you share in common, because you're just looking at, well, everyone has to align with me on this bigger goal. And if you don't align with me in this totality of this overarching goal, and you're only here, well then I'm gonna swear at you and call you names and whatever, and throw shit in your face or whatever. I don't know. I'm at a loss for words, but you know what I'm saying is, you got to choose what you're trying to do, and there's always going to be compromise. If we only stuck at where we were at, and we're only nice and trying to work with people at where we were at, then things would be even worse than they are, as bad as they are now, in terms of the movement and the community or whatever, and the people who are working into creating this type of content. There would be even less people being influenced because of that severity of that vitriol and that acidic type of interaction that you're providing with people, because people aren't ready to hear it. Just like, Passio had his way, and he's looking for the real men, the real women, not the babies who want to be spoon fed, and you can do it that way. And like, okay, and like, I'm not saying I have a problem with it, because I'm not part of identifying with the community or the group of anything. And if you're going to attack certain people, and that's another thing, to attack people, well, are they not doing any work, or are they doing work? Like Passio's talked about a lot. Like, he's not going to attack people who are doing some of the work because they're actually involved, so they're in the trenches, even though you wouldn't associate with them and you don't like them necessarily, but you're there beside them figuratively in the trenches fighting the war. So it's like, yeah, okay, thank you for being there. And yes, you have more work you can do, and you can put out your own content and, create like here's a 10-step program to elevate yourself in moral unity and moral alignment, and, get up to the level of other people. And I think that's probably a better approach, rather than trying to bring people down who are in it in some capacity. Again, they're in it at this level. They're not in it at your level, at the bigger level, but they're in at it at a smaller level. So that's already something. And rather than try to tear them down, try to create content which could be tailored at a psychological level, since if you can see their inner psychological state, their inner state of consciousness, then you can see where they're maybe something that is blocking them, and then you can create content that targets like that aspect of self-knowledge that they lack, and then create a series of content. That's sort of what I'm doing here with the Great Work Launchpad and the shadow work, is trying to get people access to information where they can come across it, and then it'll get them to think about their own inner state and then try to improve themselves. And so if you see people or a group that's at a lower level, and you can see their state of consciousness and what's blocking them, then you can create content in an impersonal way, which doesn't specifically target them. And, I'm going to point at you and make fun of you and look at you over there, you're an idiot. And, and then that just makes them, if they're just starting out or something, that could lower their self-esteem, because they're, that could diminish their, the people are attacking me, I'm not liked, well, I'm just not going to do it anymore. There is this aspect of, in addition to the compromise, it's not tearing other people down necessarily. So you can talk about people specifically, but, Passio doesn't do it for a reason, because people are in the trenches with him in some capacity, not as deep or as hard hitting or as devoted as he was, but they were doing something. So it's something, and it's something that can be improved upon. And then you create content, and that can influence them to up their game, or influence their own shadow work and development and moral unity to understand things better, rather than try to tear them down, or like turn your, as he said, it was like you're in the trenches and fighting the enemy, and instead of fighting them, well, you're turning the gun on the people beside you in the trenches. Because that's exactly one of the podcasts that he said was like exactly this symbolism, this metaphor of you're fighting a common enemy. Like I said, even if it's at this level and it's not at your level, well, it's still at a common level of some kind. And instead of continuing to target that level and maybe influence them, hey, you're aiming over here at this little part, but if you aim over here, it'll have a much bigger impact, or whatever, metaphorically. And you're instead just shooting at them. Well, you're not. Your eye isn't on the actual target. You've turned it on the people in the trenches with you, and then you're going to target them. And that's not beneficial to the overall effort of the great work and the goal of actualizing true freedom, because you're going to be, well, turning the weapon on the people already in the trenches with you, who are, maybe less morally unified. Maybe they're doing more content than you are, even though you're more morally unified. So there's this other dynamic too, is that maybe they do have more content. Maybe their content is more targeted at you than yours, even though you're at a higher moral level. They're doing better um, informational content creation in order to elevate other people's consciousness. So there's that other dynamic that oh yeah, well they're not as morally united, but rather than me target them as like, oh well, you're not as morally united as me, recognize that, oh well, they're the content they do create is more targeted towards that great work goal of true freedom. And well, maybe you could do the same rather than turning your gun on the people in the trenches with you, fighting that common enemy at whatever aspect that they're able to visualize it and target it, and you can see more of it or whatever. And you're working at a larger level trying to target more of it, and they're targeting a smaller part. Well, you can see like, oh well, yeah, maybe that's more effective. Actually focusing on that enemy that we share in common, or if you want to target your bigger enemy overall, well, focus there instead of focusing on the people that are in the trenches with you. As Passio was saying, that you're not helping the great work essentially, because
Yep.
you're shooting the people who are in the great work with you. So it's like
Yep.
diminishing the amount of people. It's like if it was real, you'd be shooting the people who are
You're
on
only
this.
hurting yourself,
Yeah, exactly.
pretty much.
In that
Yeah.
overall goal, you'd be shooting them and killing them. We're not actually doing that when we whatever criticize or people who target other people. They're not actually killing them, but whatever. It has its limitations. The analogy, it's not a perfect analogy, but you get my
Yeah.
point. So go ahead if you want. I've been
Yeah.
talking
Because
for a fucking long time.
if that was, of course you're talking about and hell analogy, but if that was, like a real, war scene and you started shooting your own team, then there's less people there to fight back. So then therefore, if there's less people to fight back, then the enemy is just going to take you over a lot easier and faster, you know. Which should be common sense. And I don't know why, we have, like other people who claim to be doing this work attacking other people who are doing this work. Like that's not what we need. That just brings more disunity. If you are truly about freedom, if you're truly about how natural law and true unity, then you know you don't have to hell agree with everybody. Lord knows I don't. That's totally fine. That's not what it's not about. Hell agreement. There are many people who create content that may not be on the moral aspect of things, but they still bring some level of good information, you know, toward the battle. And I have, more respect for those individuals because, hey, what they are doing is still somewhat of a contribution compared to some individuals, may understand the moral aspect, but they're not doing anything. So yeah, I totally, get what you're saying. And I understand, why all this going back and forth and trying to hell attack people. It's just, to me, it's just childish and we don't really need it. It really does bring down the overall effort, when it comes to true freedom, because it's not that many, like it's really not that many true teachers, doing this kind of work. So why would we try to bring some of them down, you know with ad hominems and just childish, hell attacks? It really does um do more, negativity to the overall bigger picture. And that's the thing. Step back and get a different perspective, get a different angle, and see the bigger picture here, that is supposed to be about freedom and end of slavery. And we're not going to get to that if we have people, in the trenches turning their guns, of course, talking about symbolically using an analogy, and shooting the ones who are right beside them. We really don't need that. So, but yeah, I totally get what you were saying, and I hope more people will start to understand that and put whatever smaller differentials held aside and see the bigger picture is supposed to be about ending slavery, you know, learning more about ourselves, trying to spread this message of objective morality. So, maybe one day, not in our lifetime, sadly, the next generation or the generation, after that can truly experience freedom, because that's what this is supposed to be about, doing the great work and serving truth.
Yep. So I think we're good to end it there. Been almost an hour and a half.
Yeah.
I'll have to note my.
And I'm sweating.
Yeah, me too. I closed my window because those mini black flies were a problem, and yeah, hopefully I don't have this mic problem again. I think it was the whole part on the blue slide for the disunity consciousness. We're talking about that when Derek left, and so that's a big chunk that would have been muted. But
If you're going to be using OBS like that, you may want to invest in a stream deck. It really does help, if you know what that is.
I'd like a box where you control
Yeah.
levels and inputs.
Yeah. Hello. That's it. Yeah. Yeah, you can kind of see it. Yeah, right here. Yeah, it really does.
Well, I don't know why it was muted. Yeah, in the audio mixer, it was like muted. It wasn't muted in the other views. I know it's happened before, and then like someone in the chat, like Theo, would tell me, "Oh, you're muted," and I'm like, "All right, thanks." This time I didn't notice it, and yeah, and then I eventually noticed it, and well, so I'll have to check the video and make a note when I upload the video to beware that there's gaps in the audio for a certain time period, which sucks. But at least the infographics are there. I guess people can stare at them for 20 minutes while there's
and the overall message can still be understood. That's how good your slides are.
Yeah, I was basically just reiterating them, but in more detail. Yeah. So thanks again for coming by, and I guess next week, I don't know. We might revisit the apathy, ignorance, cowardice, and laziness. Maybe tie it into. I know I keep coming back to this, trying to get into it for like the past 2 or 3. I feel we're not. I don't know. We're not getting into it too much. Like we're skating around it, but I think there's like more. There's more stuff to flesh out. There's more.
Yeah.
There's more stuff that we can dig up around it to be more in detail. I'll or maybe think about something else, and we could start with like a wrap up on that to go in detail, and then go into something else. Oh, I have more notes here that I didn't even get into. So yeah, we could talk about the whole aspect of not being united with moral truth that is known and still creating evil, and how that ties into self-loathing and self-love and needing to do self-respect, and the disunity of and thinking and knowing that the great work is needed but not doing it, and saying you want true freedom to happen but not doing the requirements. Or I might have talked about that last time. Anyways, I'll think about it and yeah, try to see what the next one will be. But next week, episode 7, Shadow Work 5, and we'll get more into shadow work stuff, which will have many more weeks to come. So thank you again, Brandon. Appreciate you coming by. And
Thanks for having me.
See you next week.